Bienvenido al podcast oficial de nuestro equipazo en Filantropía Puerto Rico, Somos Filantropía. Estas conversaciones profundizan, visibilizan y amplifican los esfuerzos que adelantan la equidad dentro del ecosistema social de Puerto Rico. Nuestros invitados compartirán sus perspectivas sobre temas sociales desde sus experiencias y especialidades. Así que busca un espacio cómodo, sírvete un café de aquí, claro está, y danos oído.
Saludos, bienvenidos a otro episodio de Somos Filantropía. En este episodio vamos a tener un cambio y vamos a hablar en inglés porque nuestra invitada especial, que la voy a presentar ya mismo, estamos justamente en Savannah, Georgia, y vamos a hablar un poco de esto, aprovechando la oportunidad de que estamos aquí. Así que gracias por pegar oído y bienvenidos a otro episodio. Hey Melinda!
Hello, Glenn!
Thank you so much for your time. I know you're running this event, and this is a small moment of your day that you're giving to us, so truly, truly appreciate it.
My pleasure.
No, thank you. I know you know Puerto Rico a lot, you've done a lot of work, but I wanted to ask you for this time to talk a little bit about one of the projects that you personally manage, which is Fund for Shared Insight, which is a whole platform with initiatives. Tell us a little bit about Fund for Shared Insight. We very cute call it FSI internally. FSI in Spanish, of course. FSI. But Fund for Shared Insight. How did it come about, and what's its mission? What does it work for?
I like to call it shared insight, not FSI.
Yeah, take
but it's okay.
Take the fun.
It's okay. So Fund for Shared Insight, we are a national funder collaborative based in the U.S. We're a virtual organization, which served us very well during COVID because we didn't have to open up or close down.
Yeah.
And we were started in July of 2014 and came out of an initiative where the Hewlett Foundation, which is based in California, they had a $2 million a year initiative that they were funding to improve philanthropy that ended. So they all of a sudden had extra money and no call on that money. And as I understand it, because I wasn't involved with that at the time, they went around and talked to funders around the country and asked them, if you were Hewlett and had $2 million a year to improve philanthropy, what would you do? And what happened was, lore has it, that at one of those meetings, Darren Walker, who is now the CEO of Ford, but at the time he wasn't, but he knew that he was going to become the CEO. He said, instead of Hewlett doing something on your own, why don't we pool our money and do something together? And so Faye said, that sounds great. Darren said, Ford is in, and 6 other foundations joined at that time. Without even knowing how they were going to improve philanthropy, but they pooled funds together and said, let's decide together how we want to improve philanthropy. And they looked at big data in philanthropy, influencing government, and then landed on really listening to the voices of people in communities most harmed by systemic racism and intersectional inequities, and how to help funders listen, respond, and shift power to those communities that are least consulted by philanthropy, but most impacted by philanthropy's decisions.
Wow. And did it go straight into that, like listening, responding, and shared power? I mean, apparently they went pretty quickly into listening.
Yes.
But has it been a process of kind of...
It has been.
Let's listen.
Yes. As many organizations have been on an equity journey, Shared Insight also has been on an equity journey, and we're still on this journey, learning, making mistakes, learning, improving. And in the beginning, our focus really was on listening to people. And listening is an important part of being on that equity path, but it's not sufficient by itself, just listening. Because there are bad practices in listening, there are good practices in listening. So it was really over several years, with the encouragement of our colleagues from Kellogg and Ford, who are at the core funder table. We call our main funders involved with this pooled fund, our core funders, who are really encouraging us, challenging us, sometimes crying, about how can we be about listening to people and people most marginalized and not be talking about equity. So we had assigned readings, we had discussions, we had speakers come in. We took the whole group to Montgomery, Alabama in 2018 to visit the Equal Justice Initiative and visit the Legacy Museum, which talks about the history of slavery in the United States through to mass incarceration today. We visited the National Memorial for Peace and Justice, which is also known as the Lynching Memorial. And it was really transformative. Now, it wasn't just that one experience, but it was that series of things that we did and bringing that before our core funders, who we convene 3 times a year. But it was really that moment. I mean, there's a video on our website about it that talks about how one of our colleagues was on that trip with us. And at the Equal Justice Initiative, they have this wall where they have a jar of dirt that's been collected at each lynching site in the state of Alabama, because that's where they're located. And one of our colleagues, as she was looking at these jars, found her last name on one of those jars of dirt. And she had no idea that she had a relative who had been lynched in Alabama. And for us to be on that journey with her and to grieve with her,
just listening to
and to grieve with her, and for Shared Insight to be this container for us to process that together. We came out of that changed as individuals, our hearts, our minds, our funder collaborative. There was no question we had to be focused on equity, racial equity in our work. And it was very clear, the through line about listening and equity. And as you talk about equity, you need to start talking about power.
Exactly.
Yeah. So we've been on this journey, and every 3 years we revisit our theory of change. So I'd really say in this last 3-year period is when we've really solidified this language about shared insight is about listening, responding, and shifting power.
Great. I want to talk more about that. But it seems that I love it that it seems they had the will to come together and kind of decide the theme that they wanted to learn more about. And then there was a process of them really opening up to learning, these funders.
Yes.
And from there, now you run a bunch of different initiatives and programs and other things. And this is kind of how we met. We met at a Feedback Labs conference. And
my life has never been the same.
Mine either.
For the good.
Yes, definitely. It appreciated likewise. But we met there, and then since we had met, I remember you took out this open call for proposals about listening, and for people that knows Filantropía and have seen our work, our project, Learning to Listen, really came out of support from FSI. I mean, if you go to our website, you see it. But I know there's a lot of people that listen to us that participated as a participant in Learning to Listen. So now you kind of know the backstory. But I remember the open call came out and it was listening, and we were like, oh, this is great for us, because we were a very young PSO. We're still young. But it helped us be very intersectional in all the things that we do, because yes, we are a philanthropy serving organization. We're kind of an intermediary, that we have a fund, a funders collaborative that we manage, and we give services to our philanthropy. We were coming from disasters, and we put all of that together, serving our membership. We had a fund, and then with this proposal, we came up with this initiative of Learning to Listen, which is a participatory grant-making process where you learn to listen in practice with the added level of being a participatory process, but we had funders, nonprofits, and community leaders in the table, with the principal voice being the community leaders. But there was so many levels of meaning and programming that we have because of where we come from, that it was very interesting to say the least. And I say all this because it was a great experience. FSI has been, or Shared Insight has been with us all along that way, and then all the tools from Learning to Listen come from that project. And now we've been, in the last 2 years, been part of a community of practice that Shared Insight has sustained, and we've been lucky to be part of that community of practice of other PSOs that are also doing kind of learning how to listen and just also to create tools and come together so we can expand this message further. And I say all of this because we are on location in Savannah, Georgia, in one of our community practice meetings that we have this year. So we're very, very grateful. But again, this is actually kind of before our last day, and I've had so many learnings and realizations and just things. And right now, you are very much, at least in this space of listening, responding, and shifting power. Could you tell us a bit more about this kind of framework of these three?
Well, we've had conversations before about the importance of a high-quality feedback loop. So if you think about listening to community, it's not just going out and listening and then coming back and doing nothing.
Yes.
You need to listen and make sure you're listening to the variety of voices that are least heard in your communities. You need to then respond to what you hear. So hearing what the community is saying, responding to that, and then closing the loop with the folks who've given you their voices, their opinions, their feedback, and saying, we heard this, and here's what we're going to do differently because of what we've heard. And sometimes it's, here's what we heard, and here's why we can't do anything about it. Or help us figure out what to do. And we talk a lot about participants becoming partners in the process. And I would say all of that needs to have an equity frame to it as you think about who you're listening to, how you're interpreting that data, engaging people from the community and making sense of the feedback and the listening, helping you figure out as a funder how to respond, how to best close the loop. And ultimately what we do want to see is that funders are shifting power to community. So your Learning to Listen initiative that had participatory practices in it is really where we're trying to encourage funders to engage more in participatory practices, which isn't just participatory grant making, which is one way of shifting power by giving a pool of funds to community decision making, but it can involve designing how that initiative happens. It could be how you measure the results of that work and making sure that people are involved from the community in deciding what's the appropriate way to even measure success for this initiative. It can be the grant making itself. But we also talk in our work about the importance of the seats of power, so the boards of foundations, having people with lived expertise, or sometimes we call it systems expertise. And them actually having a seat at the table where real decisions are being made across the entire funding entity, and not just one person from the community, right? There's a lot of opportunity, right? We see a lot of this in terms of tokenization and people who are not supported in their position, and then people say, oh, see, it didn't work.
Right. I love, I'll interrupt you for a second there, because I love when you say lived experience, because sometimes with very good intentions, yes, we any thought that we have of, either it's a woman or a person of color or, whatever it is, it's like we put them, but you really want the diversity because of the lived experience.
Yes.
If it happens to be that it has different characteristics, then that is that's great.
Yes, we're not talking about racial, ethnic diversity, checking the boxes, but really, if you're funding in homelessness, do you have someone who's experienced being unhoused, who is advising your work as a foundation, sitting on your board? My example that I often get, we're both island girls.
Yes.
I grew up in Hawaii. But it's
We've
been
talking about Hawaii.
a long time since I lived there, right? So I was born and raised, but I left when I was 17.
Yeah.
So even though I'm from the island, I don't live there anymore.
Yeah.
And for me, in my home in Philadelphia to be making decisions about what's going on in Hawaii makes no sense. Because I'm not from there anymore. I mean, it breaks my heart that I'm not from there anymore.
Absolutely.
And it's still home.
And you can make other decisions and enjoy other things. And I
Yes.
appreciate that you say that, because in Puerto Rico we have the same, the same relationship. We have a lot of Puerto Ricans that do not live, haven't lived on the island,
Right.
or haven't even grown up on the island.
And one might argue that they shouldn't be the ones making decisions.
One might argue, and some other people may argue
Yes.
that day. So
Yeah.
we respect all decisions too. But yes, I definitely agree. What would you say, again, going to this listening, responding, and shifting power? So I know we'll go into listening, but this responding, what if you can't respond?
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
It was really interesting.
and I say this because I think there's a lot of people resist on occasion if there isn't a response.
Mm-hmm. Well, yes, there is the backdrop of a lot of funders have asked community for their opinion and done nothing with it.
Mm-hmm.
And then that just feels very extractive. The community feels used. They have no incentive to participate in giving feedback again. So we don't want to do that. It's interesting. I'll tell a little story. During COVID, the early days, everyone was scrambling. How do we know really what the community needs? And there was one health conversion foundation that we had a good relationship with, and they called and they said, we're afraid to ask the community what they need because we think they're going to overwhelm us.
Right.
And we can't do everything during COVID. Like, what do we do?
Right.
And we said, isn't it better to ask and then tell them what you heard? And to be clear, like, they know you can't do everything,
Yes.
but you can do some things. And it's better to be able to respond and say, all right, we hear that housing is an issue, that jobs are an issue, that access to food is an issue. Like, we can't do all of those things, but here are the things we can do.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to do them in partnership with the community. We're going to keep checking in with you to hear if what we're doing is the right thing. And then these other things that we're hearing, well, maybe you could talk to other funders in the community who do fund transportation or housing or who can address those
let's
needs.
think of other ideas.
Yeah, and be collaborative. But, we all would love to hear back
Yes.
when we give feedback. Like, what did you do with it? Sometimes when I take
Acknowledgement.
Yes. Like, sometimes when I take plane rides or things like that, I put a 0. Just to see if they're going to respond. And I never get a response. So you're like, why should I fill out your surveys if you're
That's
not actually
true.
going to respond? But
That's
for
true.
a funder who's in a position of power with resources, like, I think it's our obligation to be thoughtful about how we
Yes.
ask, not to be extractive in the way we do it,
Mhm.
and then to respond. And respond doesn't mean I'll solve everything that you're telling me are issues or problems, but it's really explaining what you can do and what you can't do and engaging the community as partners. And
Exactly. It's even just
solutions.
acknowledging and having presence that goes a long way too.
And it's about relationship.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Which are long term. Maybe I can't respond how you want now, but in the future I may. At least I know. Awesome. So again, let's closing the loop by shifting power. What would that be? How does that look like?
So it looks like a variety of different ways. I mean, we touched on some of this earlier in our conversation, but we have what's called a funder listening action menu that we've worked on with this community of practice here in Savannah this week.
Yes.
Got a lot of good feedback on that, and we're going to respond and close the loop about that feedback. We talk about different ways.
Do you feel
do
pressure to always be like, we have to be like top of listening, responding, and shifting
We do,
power?
because we need to walk the walk.
I know.
Right? You can't be like, it's only for other people to close the loop. We need to be living out the values and the principles and practices. So we talk a lot about how you can help your grantee partners listen, how you can build the capacity of your nonprofit partners to listen alongside your grantee partners. That's one whole way of thinking about listening. But that really puts the onus on the nonprofits to listen, and the funders need to be responsible in building their capacity, funding them to do that work. But then for the funder themselves, there are many ways to incorporate listening into the way that you're doing your work, whether it's to inform the way you make grants who you make grants to, how you make those grants, listening to inform your strategy development. So sometimes you have one idea of what a good strategy should be for your foundation. You know better than the community what they need. But if you don't listen to the community and ask them what they really think are the highest priorities, once you listen, it may change your strategy.
Yeah. Or it might validate it.
Or it might validate
it. But you
Exactly.
listen to it. Absolutely.
Yes, and making sure, again, that you're listening to a broad range of voices and not just one particular slice of the community.
Yes.
And then we talked about listening in the way that you do evaluation, so engaging people as participants in your evaluation design, being very community-centered in the way you do your evaluation, and then bringing people from the community who have lived expertise onto your staff, onto your board. There are many, many different ways to think about incorporating listening or shifting power.
Right.
And not all those examples are starting with power shifting,
Right.
but we recognize that funders come to this work at all different stages and levels of ability to act on things. So we want to make it bite-sized for some folks, and then maybe for folks who are more advanced in their listening practices, then we can really talk about that shifting power piece.
Yeah, it's a journey. I think you've created a great roadmap. So again, it's what happens along the journey.
Yes.
So everybody will be different. I don't think it's necessarily a more advanced or bigger. It's like at this moment, this is kind of where you are, because each community or each issue will be different. So you might just begin like listening well, which is one of the menus, like listen well. What does that mean? Listen well.
So listening well, we would define as listening to that variety of voices, so making sure you have a broad representation from the community. Listening well means having an equity lens to how you're listening as well. Listening well means all this that we've talked about in terms of responding and closing the loop. And that listening is not, again, extractive. It's listening so that you can respond and hopefully ultimately shift power to communities.
Oh, partner up, yeah.
Well, because, we talked about this here in Savannah. If you survey funders, 99% will say, we're listening. And they probably are listening in different ways, right? They're in the community, they're doing site visits. But we're talking about listening well, and there's a specific definition we have on our website about that. And when we've surveyed funders, do you listen? Yes, everyone listens.
This way.
But then we say, okay, here's our definition of listening well.
Yes.
How many of you are listening well? We have much fewer people who raise their hands.
Yes.
And everyone's, on the path. So those who say, I don't know how we're listening, then we encourage them, find out how you're listening to community.
Yes. Yeah. So I have also, I'd love your thoughts on, because when we talk about listening, we talk about listening to the people affected by the decisions that you make. So, and the shifting power is kind of giving them also decision power because they're going to affect them. So many times it means that you got funder, you got the nonprofit organization, and then you got the community or the affected. So how do you see that relationship? I'm just curious, have you seen any challenges or resistance of, the funder has a relationship with the organization? Should they go all the way? Should they involve? Just wondering if there have been any thoughts, even from an organization, like, well, your relationship with me, not with them, or just curious.
There's no one right way. So let's just start with that. So you have to take each situation. You may be familiar that when Shared Insights started in 2014, soon after that we incubated a program called Listen for Good. And we've now spun it off. So it's an independent organization, but their whole focus is on building the capacity of nonprofit organizations to listen well.
Yes.
As we're defining it, this whole feedback loop, including responding and closing the loop. And they've now worked with over 1,000 nonprofits in the United States.
The website is full of great information and kits and a lot of resources. We've used them a lot.
Yeah, so Listen for Good is a great resource for funders and nonprofits to listen to community. And that's one way for a funder then to listen to community through this capacity building program called Listen for Good. There are other ways that funders can do direct listening to community, polling, community research, site visits. There's a whole variety of ways that funders can do that. And as with anything that funders do, the power dynamic really needs to be attended to.
Right.
Sometimes funders might be criticized for jumping over their nonprofit partners to go straight to community. And it really needs to be in communication with, in partnership with your nonprofit community, because the nonprofits know the community the best, typically,
Yes.
and can be the ones to mediate those conversations. We gave one example here in Savannah about the James Irvine Foundation in California. So they did a variety of things, including funding 20-some organizations to do Listen for Good, but they also did a whole Listening to California Voices sessions. They listened to like 400 people across the state of California in these different listening sessions, and then they went back and oversampled for Asian American Pacific Islanders because they realized they weren't listening well to that particular subset of the California population. So they employed a variety of ways of listening. One thing that I thought of when you asked me this question is, what's been a great outcome of some of this Listen for Good work is that sometimes the funder will say, oh, I've never asked our nonprofit partners what they think of us. Right. So how can I then ask the nonprofit to ask the participants of their programs what they think if we're not walking the walk? So it's been sort of a beautiful thing when sometimes a funder has been like, oh, we need to listen to our nonprofit partners and we need to listen to our staff before we ask nonprofits to do the same. So they're really building in this muscle around listening to a variety of different stakeholders.
Definitely. Yeah, it's very interesting. I think there's a lot of change by listening and the funder asking feedback about them, but really also being as a partner asking the organization, what feedback do you get from your community and the work that you do? Which on occasion could seem, I think, for the organization, if they haven't gotten that, that question could be like, a little weird. But again, if there's a partnership and there's trust, then we need to be accountable. Cool. I know you also have a participatory grant making toolkit, which is pretty awesome. You want to tell us about that?
Yes.
And I know Puerto Rico was part of that whole process.
Yes, it was very exciting. So it's actually a participatory philanthropy toolkit because, again, it's much more than just the grant making. But it came out of, originally in 2020, a participatory climate initiative that we're trying to do to learn more about participatory grant making. But out of that experience, we realized, there are so many lessons having to do with many different participatory practices that one can take in philanthropy. And what we loved about it is the funders involved with Fund for Shared Insight put aside $1 million for this initiative because they wanted to learn about participatory practices. We picked climate sort of serendipitously. It's not an issue area that we fund in. But I think there was some passion around how can we motivate funders to.
And there's so many disasters and crises, so it makes total sense.
So there was a design team that was composed of people across the country who have lived expertise in climate. We did not select them. It wasn't the funders that did this. It was
I participated in
so you nominated, right?
Yes.
So you were part of the nomination process. And what was so cool, because I was like, please fund, the islands. Please fund.
Puerto Rico.
And what came out of that was the design team said we should do 2 funds. One in the southeastern United States, including Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands, which I don't know why some people don't define that as part of southeastern U.S. Whatever.
Yes.
And then the other region was Alaska and Hawaii.
Yeah.
And then there were 2 grant-making groups.
Those are the regions I think, I don't have data, but they don't get funded.
Yes.
There's not so many awareness of it.
Right. And what we loved, specifically, I was involved with the Alaska-Hawaii cohort. So they had one funder, me, who sat in on all the grant-making group meetings. And then there was another colleague of ours from the Kellogg Foundation who sat in on the Southeastern United States grant-making group. And again, the grant-making group was composed of people that were nominated by the design team and other nonprofit partners across the country. And it was just such a beautiful, joyous process to just listen and learn from my fellow climate experts, people who had lived expertise in this work, and for them to decide who should get the money and how much. And something that I shared earlier today is originally, the funders put aside $1 million for this, and the design team came back and said, that's not enough money.
It's nothing.
First of all, we want to do 2 regions.
Right.
$10 million, $100 million would be great.
Yes.
But I was like, I don't think I can raise that, but I can raise probably another $1 million. So that's what we did, was we raised another $1 million within like 3 months. It was amazing.
You can probably raise it, but it'll take you longer.
It'll take me much longer to raise $10 million or $100 million. So then each region had $1 million to decide where the money would go in terms of these grants and which organizations.
Beautiful.
And they chose organizations that I can guarantee you most program officers in climate or environment would not have chosen. There's a beautiful video on our website and part of the Participatory Philanthropy Toolkit where this cosmic sanctuary poetry guy, artist, recites his poetry, and it's so powerful.
Can you see me?
Can
Go
you
check
see
it out.
me? Yes. Can you see me? And it was so beautiful too to see the connections between the folks from Hawaii and Alaska with each other. We call that the Kolea region because there's a bird that migrates between those 2 places. Yes, that's a long distance.
Yeah.
And then when we did the convenings, there was folks from Puerto Rico who came to our Hawaii convening. There were folks from Hawaii who went to the Puerto Rico convening. And there was a lot of similarities that folks saw between the island
Pollination.
Yes.
Yeah.
So relationships built, information shared. And out of all of that, we then developed this participatory philanthropy toolkit that talks not just about how we did it, because we're not expecting that any funder will replicate exactly how we did it, but there are tools like the budget, the project
Which
plan,
is very
the
important.
Sample, facilitation, many different components of it.
Yes. It's very detailed. I love it. I checked it out, so we're gonna link it down, and it's another resource that we have on our page of all resources for philanthropy. So you'll find it in a couple of places. But yes, even those little details of because the process of sustaining the teams and taking them to decisions is one thing, but the whole infrastructure that you need to create that process is another thing. I mean, we were able to do it because we had the grant from Shared Insight, so we had the Forward Fund that was the sub-granting, our membership services, and then this grant supported that part. If not, we wouldn't have had that intersectionality, we wouldn't have been able to do that process. So we were very blessed and lucky by that.
Yeah, and we were very blessed and lucky too that our funder collaborative just gave us the time. Just like we launched this during COVID.
Yes.
So, to do a virtual participatory initiative with folks who were literally battling not just COVID, but there were several hurricanes, there were some huge storms in Alaska.
Well, in Puerto Rico there were earthquakes.
Yes, so we were working through all of that, and yet there was such a commitment to helping philanthropy do better through participatory approaches. That was the participants in this climate initiative were really, really passionate about not only bringing resources to their communities around climate, but also educating funders about how they could do their philanthropy differently, how they could shift power to community, trust community more.
Cool. I appreciate your work a lot, and I love also one of the strategies that you've taken, or I think that you've taken, is the PSO strategy, right? Not grant making, or you do have other things, but you've taken this group for the last 4 years or maybe more of PSOs and supported them because I'm assuming they can scale, right? You're also everything that you have and all the resources. It helps to scale and to really expand more the message.
And also because from the beginning, when we were founded in 2014, Fund for Shared Insight was never meant to be an ongoing concern. Like, we're not our own 501c3. We are a sponsored project through Rockefeller Philanthropy Advisors. And we're designed that way because we weren't meant to be forever and ever. And we do see our philanthropy serving partners, like Filantropía Puerto Rico, as key partners in making sure that this work continues. So these principles and practices around equity-centered listening, responding, shifting power, if we can better equip you as our partners in this. The last 2 days has been like a deep dive into here are our tools, and here's how to use it, and here's how to talk about it. Here's how to promote these tools with your funders and your networks. Like that work is going to live on because Filantropía Puerto Rico is going to live on beyond shared insight, and we want you to be a strong organization and well equipped to carry this work forward.
Absolutely.
Plus, it's super joyful to hang out with you.
Yeah, likewise. So Melinda, we always end up with this question. How does shared insight and Melinda, on a personal note, advance equity?
I think for shared insight, and for me, we did this great session today with our colleagues, Pro Inspire, called Here to Listen. And they had us reflect a lot on our personal power, professional power. And I think shared insight too, as a funder collaborative composed of some of the largest foundations really in the world, that where we need to be about centering equity, promoting equity is who we work with, how we do our work, what consultants we use, the kinds of work that we fund, and making sure that we are constantly holding up a mirror to ourselves around how does this work, this hire, this consultant, this toolkit reflect our principles and values around equity. And so we're constantly doing that, and we have Gita, as you know, who's our equity partner, who has been with us since 2017. Really her job, and she's on our management team, is to hold up that mirror and constantly asking, does this reflect our equity values? And I've been on this equity journey too, because as I mentioned, when we started in 2014, we were like,
it's nonstop.
Yeah, we were thinking about equity.
Right.
I was a leader, and I was not bringing in that equity lens to our work. So I've done my own work in learning, and been so privileged to be a part of this collaborative where we're all learning together. And really just, again, being mindful of my own power. You may also identify with this, but I was like, it's just me, Melinda. I'm not a powerful person. I'm small. I'm friendly. But no, I have power because I have this position. I have these networks. I have the resources. And just to constantly be reminded of the power that I do have and how to be responsible with that and how to shift and share my own power with others.
Yeah. And I see it, and it's important to hang out with people that see it so they remind you of it. So thank you.
Thank you.
And folks, we just spoke with Pro Inspire to do a podcast too. So you'll hear a chapter with them as well and see more of those tools. Thank you, Melinda, for your time and your knowledge and always your inspiration as well. We're going to put all the information of shared insight below this podcast. And again, thanks for being here, folks. See you on our next one.